There's no doubt that the pandemic has been wreaking havoc here on the economy in Canada and worldwide, really. Licensed insolvency trustees Bromwich and Smith recently released the results of a survey that shows that it has been affecting a number of different sectors of the population here in Canada. Let's welcome Jasmine Marra from Bromwich and Smith. Jasmine, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, this survey was conducted over 3 days in September. 1,500 Canadians surveyed online. Some very bleak looking results as far as how their socioeconomic progress has been affected.
Yes, that's right, Mike. We have definitely seen a number of groups sliding back in socioeconomic progress. Specifically, we see low income individuals, so those who are on the front lines, hourly workers, but also new Canadians, women, and minorities. So we see a number of groups sliding back as a result of this pandemic.
A lot has been spoken about how this has affected women, and it definitely has had some dire effects on women's progress in the workplace.
Prior to the pandemic sort of hitting us, we saw that women in the workplace was hitting new levels. And now, post-pandemic, as we continue to, go into the second wave and the months drag on, we're actually seeing that women have leaned out of the workforce quite substantially. So substantially so that we're at, back at where we were 3 decades ago. So quite a bit of erosion in the progress of women in the workplace.
What would be the reason for that? Is it the types of jobs that have fallen by the wayside during COVID 19?
Well, we see a number of reasons. One, certainly the type of jobs. We do see a number of jobs that have been primarily affected are held by women. But also, there's some financial implications. So, even if we're in sort of a general gender supportive household, if you will, if we have two working parents, often we see the women still make slightly less. So, just financially speaking, it makes more sense for the man to stay in the workforce and for the woman to lean out.
You also found that seniors were unduly affected.
That's right. Certainly, seniors, and there's no question we've seen seniors' homes hit very hard. Even the government programs that we've seen rolled out aren't typically very conducive to seniors. It's difficult for them to get online. It's difficult for them to be in person because they're immunocompromised and slightly older. So they have seen that socioeconomic progress roll back to, a place we'd like it not to be.
Jasmine, as we are now in what we might call the second wave, and we maybe anticipate scaling back some of the freedoms that came back to us in stage three, will the effect be even worse in the long run?
What we're seeing right now from a statistics perspective is our recent survey showed about 1 in 5 Canadians are going to explore insolvency in the near future. Specifically for Ontarians, it's 22%, sort of topping the charts across Canada. So I do see that those government programs have provided us a little bit of a cushion. So we are seeing a decrease in insolvencies in actual numbers, but future forecast is looking pretty difficult for Canadians.
What will it take to turn things around? Will it just be, the end of COVID 19? Is that how long we have to wait?
Well, I think the difficulty with this socioeconomic progress is that as time rolls on, it becomes more difficult for these groups to get back into the workforce. So even if the pandemic sort of subsides, I fully expect it will be more difficult to make that progress back up. Time will certainly tell. I think from a government perspective, starting to normalize the conversation of financial impact. We have seen the government programs provided a little bit of a cushion, but we haven't specifically addressed these socioeconomic groups. And so there may be more that we can do as a society and through the government to facilitate some sort of additional buoyancy in these particularly vulnerable groups.
Jasmine, both the federal and the provincial government have thrown a lot of money at these supports over the last 7 or 8 months.
Well, there's no question. There's lots of conversation as to whether or not these supports were the right things to do for Canadians. But I think we did what we had to do under their circumstances. But there will be long tail effects. Are we doing everything we can? Perhaps we're doing what we think we should. There's more to explore, certainly. I think the one thing I'd love to see us come out of this pandemic with, one of the things that's difficult about financial struggle is there's still a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of shame, a lot of stigma. And so, as Canadians, we're having this sort of collective experience. And so, we shouldn't be ashamed to reach out if we are having financial difficulty. The worst thing we can do in this situation is sort of let it spiral out of control on an individual basis.
How do you plan to use the data moving forward?
It was really about getting a benchmark on how Canadians are feeling from a financial perspective during COVID 19, also about benchmarking for us. So, we intend to drop this survey again in the early new year. And it's really to see how much we have shifted financially, whether or not we see some increase in those socioeconomic rollbacks, as we've discussed, and see whether or not, as time goes on and gets into the second and third wave, as you mentioned, Mike, that we make some progress. So really helping us benchmark and potentially talk about debt and finances in a different way.